The flight manual says never look into the ocean during descent. The first time I broke that rule, something looked back. It happened over the Pacific, somewhere around 4 in the morning, and the worst part wasn't what I saw down there. The worst part was how fast my brain tried to make it normal. Lights under the water. Must be ships. That's what your mind reaches for first, even when nothing about the shape of it makes sense, even when the math of it is impossible. Your brain is a coward when it doesn't recognize something. It will lie to you for as long as you let it. I've been flying overnight Pacific routes for almost 4 years, not commercial, private charter, the kind of aviation most people never see unless they work inside it. No airline logos, no booking sites, no flight trackers feeding the public, just black Gulf Streams and custom-painted Boeing business jets moving very rich people between places that technically don't exist on any map you can buy at an airport bookstore. Our passengers were billionaires, old money families, biotech executives, foreign investors, the occasional diplomat who never made eye contact with anyone. They traveled with assistants who never spoke and bodyguards who always looked more exhausted than threatening. Most of them brought their own pillows. The company itself barely existed online. Meridian Executive Aviation. No reviews, no headquarters listed, no interviews, no press. Just a polished employee portal and a private terminal outside Los Angeles where the carpets always smelled faintly like old cigarettes trapped underneath industrial cleaner. I worked cabin operations, which sounded more glamorous than it was. Mostly it meant overnight flights, reheated luxury meals nobody touched, pretending not to hear conversations about offshore accounts, and watching very tired rich people stare into the dark over the Pacific for 12 hours straight. People imagine that kind of aviation feels exciting. It doesn't. At 3 in the morning over open water, even billionaires look lonely. Especially when the cabin lights dim and they catch their own reflection in the window and remember how far down it is. A small thing I didn't think about until much later. When I went to clock in that night, my badge swiped twice. My start date on the welcome screen flickered for a moment, showing a year I hadn't worked there yet, then corrected itself before I could be sure I'd really seen it. I told myself it was the screen refreshing. The terminal had old monitors. They did that sometimes. That flight started normally, which is why I still remember every small thing that felt wrong before the descent began. The passengers boarded quietly around 11:40 p.m. There were only 6 that night, an older married couple, a young tech founder I recognized from magazine covers, a woman with silver hair, maybe 70, wearing a cream-colored suit and pearl earrings, 2 men traveling together who barely spoke and refused, offered drinks with the same exact hand gesture, less than a minute apart. Nobody had luggage beyond carry-ons. That was normal for the island flights. Nobody ever packed like they were staying somewhere long. The pilots were Harris and Lynn. I trusted both of them. Harris had the kind of permanently tired face you only get after decades of red-eye flights, dry humor, coffee breath, always rubbing his eyes under fluorescent galley lights. Lynn barely talked outside of procedure, the kind of pilot who made you nervous only because he never seemed nervous himself. Before departure, Harris handed me the descent packet. That part wasn't normal. Usually the packet stayed in cockpit storage unless weather conditions changed, but he handed it to me personally, while the engines hummed outside and the ground crew was still finishing the fuel check. The fluorescent lights above the prep counter buzzed in a way that made my back teeth itch. "Review page 9 before we cross midpoint," he said. Then he hesitated. Actually hesitated. I remember it because Harris never hesitated during procedures. He was the kind of man who'd say the same words in the same order for 40 years and not get tired of them. He looked past me into the dark cabin. "You haven't worked 7 routes before, right?" "No." "Okay." That was all. He walked back into the cockpit. The galley refrigerator compressor clicked on behind me and the packet sat on the counter untouched for almost 20 minutes. I don't know why I waited. Maybe because people instinctively avoid things they already know they're not going to like reading. While I was prepping the cabin, I noticed something I didn't think about until much later. The galley floor was wet in one corner, not from a spilled drink, not from the ice bin. It looked like someone had walked through standing water and tracked it back, and the prints traced a curve toward the rear bathroom and stopped halfway. Just stopped. No second set going back. I wiped it up. I also noticed when I went to refill the espresso machine that the small mirrored panel on the galley wall had been turned to face the cabinet door instead of the cabin. Someone had rotated it. Maybe a previous crew, maybe ground staff. It wouldn't have struck me at all except for the fact that there was a folded sticky note jammed behind it, blank on the side I could see, and I didn't pull it out. I don't know why I didn't pull it out. I just left it there and got on with my work. We departed LAX around midnight and headed west over the Pacific. Most of the passengers fell asleep within 2 hours. The cabin settled into that strange overnight flight silence where every sound feels isolated and a little louder than it should. Ice shifting in glasses, air vents whispering overhead, the low constant vibration in the floor that you stop noticing until it stops, the occasional soft footstep on carpet. Outside the windows was nothing, not darkness exactly, just absence. Open ocean at night from 39,000 feet doesn't look real. No landmarks, no horizon. Sometimes moonlight on clouds if the weather's clear. Mostly it feels like the plane stopped moving entirely and you're just hanging there in a cold black room that nobody else knows exists. Around 2:15 a.m. I finally opened the descent packet. Page 9 was highlighted in yellow. There were only 4 instructions. During final descent to Meridian Island, 1. Cabin lights must remain dimmed. 2. Passengers must keep window shades closed after initial descent announcement. 3. If lights are observed beneath the ocean surface, do not acknowledge them over intercom. 4. If a passenger reports movement below the water, reassure them descent visual distortion is normal. That was it. No explanation, no signatures, no emergency context. Just those 4 lines sitting alone on an otherwise blank page like somebody had typed them up in a hurry and stopped before adding any of the words that would have made the document feel like a document. I laughed quietly, not because it was funny. Aviation people cope with stress through sarcasm, especially at 2 a.m. over water. I assumed it was some weird anti-panic protocol. Maybe bioluminescence, maybe military testing in the area, maybe underwater construction for one of those private island compounds the company flew people to. Something classified. Still, Rule 3 bothered me. Not report, not deny, do not acknowledge. That wording stayed with me, because acknowledgement isn't a word people use casually. Acknowledgement is paperwork. Acknowledgement is a receipt. Acknowledgement is what you do when a system needs to know that you saw the thing it sent you. That detail kept turning over in my head for an hour. I was so focused on it that I almost didn't notice the older married couple in row 2 were both awake, both with their hands folded in their laps in the exact same position, both staring at the seat back in front of them without moving. Around 3:40 a.m., Harris called back from the cockpit. Crossing descent point in 20. His voice sounded flatter than usual. Microphone static, slightly thinner. I secured the cabin and started the standard procedures. Most of the passengers were already awake by then. Jet lag has a way of waking people before landing, especially on overnight ocean flights. Their bodies know something is coming, even when the schedule says they should still be asleep. The silver-haired woman was already sitting upright with her shade closed before I even made the announcement. That struck me immediately, like she knew the procedure. The older couple closed theirs too, without speaking. The 2 silent businessmen did the same almost automatically in the same gesture, like they were watching each other for cues. Then I noticed something else about them. The one on the aisle was very carefully not looking at the small reflective surface on his seatback screen. He'd angled himself just slightly away from it, the way you might angle yourself away from a draft. His partner had tilted the screen forward so it caught no light at all. Only the tech founder kept his window shade open. He was maybe early 30s, expensive hoodie, tired eyes. The kind of guy who looked permanently overstimulated by his own thoughts. When I politely asked him to close the shade, he smiled faintly without looking away from the window. I like ocean descents. Company policy during final approach, sir. He finally turned to look at me, and his expression was strange. Half curious, half disappointed. First time on 7. My stomach tightened. I didn't answer. He closed the shade, but not fully, just enough to leave a thin black line visible, like he wanted plausible deniability. I poured coffee at the galley. I remember that very clearly because it was such an ordinary thing to be doing. The coffee was lukewarm, the mug was warm in my hand, the spoon I used was slightly bent, and outside the aircraft the Pacific was waiting underneath us, and nobody was saying anything. I made the coffee. I wiped the counter. I checked the seatbelt indicator. Routine. The illusion of routine was so complete that for a few seconds I actually convinced myself the rest of the night was going to be boring. I took a small sip from my own cup. The coffee tasted faintly of salt. I held it in my mouth for a second too long, trying to decide if I was imagining it. Then I poured the cup down the drain and made a new one. The second cup was fine. I didn't think about the first one again, or I tried not to. The seatbelt chime sounded twice, not once, twice. I looked toward the cockpit. That wasn't standard. Then the intercom clicked on, but nobody spoke. Only static. 3 seconds, maybe. Then silence again. I called forward. No response. The tech founder looked up immediately. So it started early tonight, he murmured. What started? He didn't answer. A few minutes later, the first passenger stood up. The older woman from row 2. She walked slowly toward the bathroom, one hand against the seats for balance while the plane descended. But she stopped halfway down the aisle. Stopped completely. I followed her line of sight and realized she was staring at the tiny gap in the tech founder's shade. She stayed like that for several seconds, very still, the kind of stillness you only get from someone whose body has gone somewhere their mind didn't follow. Then quietly, he left it open too much. Nobody reacted, not even him. That scared me more than if they had. I walked over and closed the shade completely. His expression changed instantly. Not angry, worried, like I'd interrupted something important. Don't do that too fast, he said softly. What? The timing matters. I felt that overnight shift irritation, the kind that flares up because you don't have energy for nonsense. We're landing soon, sir. No, he said, and smiled faintly again. We're descending. The aircraft jolted slightly. Not turbulence, something subtler, like changing road texture under a car. The lights flickered once overhead, then stabilized. That's when I noticed the temperature had changed. Cabins normally stay cool during long-haul flights, but this felt damp somehow. Humid, like ocean air leaking into the plane through somewhere it shouldn't have been able to leak in from. I ran my hand along the window frame of the empty seat closest to the galley, and my fingertips came away wet. Just a thin film, condensation on the inside of a sealed cabin window at 36,000 feet. There is no aviation reason for that to happen. I wiped my hand on my uniform and pretended I hadn't noticed. The silver-haired woman spoke for the first time, very quietly. They're closer tonight. Nobody asked who. Nobody needed to. The intercom clicked on again. This time, just for a fraction of a second, I heard a voice mid-sentence. Thank you for... Clipped at both ends, like someone had spliced 1 second out of a normal cabin announcement and dropped it into the silence. Then it was gone. I went to the cockpit. The door was unlocked. Inside, both pilots were staring forward in complete silence. The cockpit lights were dim red, and Harris had sweat at his temple despite the cool air. He was gripping the yoke even though the autopilot indicator was lit. He didn't need to grip it. He was gripping it anyway. What happened with the intercom? No answer. Then Lynn quietly pointed ahead through the windshield. At first, I thought I was seeing reflected instrument lights, tiny shifting clusters beneath the clouds, blue-white movement far below us, in the kind of pattern your eyes try to dismiss as glare. Then the clouds thinned, and I realized the lights were underwater, not on the surface, beneath it, moving. Massive patterns drifting under the Pacific like entire cities slowly rotating in darkness. My brain couldn't process the scale correctly. Some lights moved in straight lines, others curved organically. Whole sections blinked in synchronized waves. Way too large to be submarines, way too organized to be natural. The ocean itself looked deeper there, not visually deeper, emotionally deeper. Like the aircraft had crossed above some place human beings were never meant to notice. Lynn finally spoke without turning. "Close the cockpit curtain." I didn't move, because one section of lights was rising, not fast, gradually, ascending toward the surface. Thousands of pale blue shapes moving together beneath black water with the patience of something that had no reason to hurry. The strange thing was how administered it looked. There was order to it. The way an airport tarmac looks at night from the air. The way a server farm looks if you've ever toured one in person. Not life rising toward us, procedure rising toward us. My chest tightened. Not fear of dying. Something older than that. Something my body recognized before my mind did. Like a part of my nervous system that hadn't been used in 100,000 years was finally being called on, and it remembered exactly what it was supposed to do. Harris grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. "Close it." I shut the cockpit curtain. The cabin felt too quiet now. I could hear the air circulation system humming through the walls. Someone softly crying near row 3. Someone else swallowing repeatedly, like they were trying to keep something down. The aircraft kept descending, and the engines softened the way they always do during approach. And for a second, everything sounded almost normal again. That's when the knocking started. Very faint at first, below the floor. 3 soft knocks, then silence. I froze. A few seconds later, 3 more, this time slightly to the left. Like something tapping from underneath the aircraft itself, working its way along the underside of the fuselage in no particular hurry. The tech founder closed his eyes. "Oh, come on." The older woman whispered a prayer under her breath in a language I didn't recognize. The 2 silent businessmen, who hadn't spoken to anyone the entire flight, suddenly began speaking to each other in low tones. They never looked away from the floor while they talked. The one on the aisle had begun very softly counting his breaths in 4s. In 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. And you could see his lips shape the numbers even though no sound was coming out. I felt adrenaline finally hit me properly. "What is that?" Nobody answered. Another 3 knocks rolled through the cabin floor, closer this time, and then the seatbelt sign turned off. By itself, nobody had touched it. I know because I was staring straight at the cockpit and could see neither pilot's hand had moved. The sign stayed dark for maybe 5 seconds, then switched back on. The chime that should have accompanied that switch never sounded. That terrified everyone. You could feel it in the cabin instantly, the shift from discomfort into actual fear, because systems on aircraft don't behave randomly. Not on jets like these. Not on aircraft that cost more than a small country's GDP. The intercom clicked again. Static flooded the cabin. Then a voice spoke. Not Harris, not Lynn, my own voice. "Please keep your window shades open during final approach." Every passenger looked directly at me. My blood went cold. The voice continued in my exact cadence, with my exact little speech habits, the way I always paused slightly before the word approach. "We're almost there." It sounded perfectly natural, not distorted, not robotic. Then the intercom cut off, and the silence that followed felt enormous, like the cabin had inhaled. I grabbed the galley phone and called the cockpit. Harris picked up immediately. "Do not use the intercom." What was that? Lock the cabin. What was that? He paused. and I heard something in his breathing I'd never heard before. Real fear. "They mimic acknowledgment," he said quietly, then disconnected. The phrase made no sense to me, but the passengers understood it, especially the silver-haired woman. She finally looked directly at me for the first time, and her eyes were so calm it was almost worse than panic. "Don't answer if they speak again." The plane descended lower. The floor knocking continued intermittently, sometimes near the rear galley, sometimes beneath first class, sometimes directly under my feet. Always 3, never 4. Cabin pressure shifted hard enough to pop my ears, and I tasted something metallic at the back of my throat. Outside, absolute darkness pressed against every shade, except one. A thin line of blue light had appeared beside row 4. The tech founder had opened his shade again. Only an inch, but it was enough. I moved toward him and stopped halfway, because light was spilling upward through the gap. Not moonlight, movement. Something glowing beneath the aircraft. His face was pale blue in the darkness, almost peaceful, like someone listening to distant music through one earbud. "Sir," I whispered. He didn't react. Then I heard him quietly counting. 7, 8, 9. "What are you doing?" 10. The plane shuddered violently, not turbulence, impact. Like something enormous brushed beneath the aircraft. Passengers gasped. The older man near the front began sobbing softly. The 2 businessmen pressed back into their seats, and one of them placed a hand on the other's forearm and left it there. The tech founder finally looked at me and smiled. They noticed us. Then, and this is the part I keep coming back to, everything went still. The engines smoothed out. The cabin lights brightened a half step toward normal. The knocking stopped. The seatbelt sign chimed once, almost cheerfully, like it had remembered it was supposed to. The older woman in row 2 exhaled audibly. Somewhere behind me, the man counting his breaths laughed. A small, embarrassed laugh, the kind people make when they realize they've been holding themselves rigid for no reason. He apologized softly to nobody in particular. Someone else's coffee cup, on a tray table, tipped over and spilled a thin line of brown liquid onto the carpet. And the businessman whose tray it was muttered, "Oh shit," and dabbed at it with a napkin. And for a moment we all watched him do that, because it was such a relief to have something to look at that made sense. The tech founder didn't move. His smile didn't change. His hand was still on the shade. I took a breath. That was when every window shade in the cabin snapped upward simultaneously. Not electronically, violently, like pulled by invisible hands. The mechanisms made a sound I'd never heard from them before, not the soft, rolling click of normal operation, but a sudden snap, almost a slap. Passengers screamed. Someone behind me hit their elbow against the seat trying to cover their face. The businessman with the napkin froze mid-dab. His coffee continued slowly bleeding into the carpet. The ocean beneath us exploded with light. Impossible structures moving under black water. Circular formations miles wide, columns descending endlessly downward. Shapes larger than cities turning slowly beneath the Pacific and rising. They were rising. Thousands of pale lights ascending toward the aircraft from impossible depths. The movement triggered something primal in me. Not the fear of dying, the fear of scale. Human beings aren't built to emotionally process things that large moving beneath them in darkness. And when you do see it, your mind tries to make it smaller, tries to make it a model, a trick, a screen, anything other than what it actually is. Several passengers covered their eyes instantly. The silver-haired woman stared straight ahead, lips barely moving. Don't let them know you can see them. But people already had. That was the problem. The tech founder stood. The cabin lights dimmed further, and something outside matched his movement. A massive shape beneath the water turning upward, directly below the aircraft. The ocean bulged, actually bulged. Like something enormous pushing against the surface from below, and the surface was straining to hold. Every cabin screen turned on at once. No signal, no interface, just live camera feeds from beneath the aircraft, black water, and lights. Closer now. I could see outlines, not clearly, but enough. Structures that moved like living things that resembled structures. My brain refused to stabilize the image. The longer I looked at any single shape, the more it shifted into something else, and my eyes ached the way they ache when you've been reading in a moving car for too long. The tech founder began laughing softly. I knew it was real. The intercom activated again. My voice returned, but calmer this time, almost satisfied, like it had finished filing something. Window acknowledgment confirmed. Every screen went black. The aircraft dropped suddenly several hundred feet. People screamed, oxygen masks half deployed and then retracted again, as if the plane had changed its mind. I hit the aisle hard enough to bruise my shoulder and tasted blood where my teeth had clipped the inside of my cheek. Beneath the screaming, I heard knocking, directly below me, not from outside anymore, inside the cabin floor. 3 knocks, then 3 more, several feet away. Something was moving underneath us. The carpet near row 5 slowly pushed upward, and a long bulge traveled beneath the aisle like a hand under a bedsheet, the carpet fibers visibly straining over the shape. Passengers recoiled. The bulge moved toward the front, toward the cockpit, and stopped halfway. Then silence. Absolute silence. Even the engines suddenly sounded distant. My ears rang the way they do after a loud concert, the high silver tone that fills the space where sound used to be. The cockpit door opened. Lynn stepped out slowly. Something was wrong immediately. His expression looked empty, not emotionless, absent, like sleepwalking. He walked halfway down the aisle and stared at the open windows, at the lights below, and then very calmly said, "They're asking for visual confirmation." Nobody moved. He looked directly at me. "Did you acknowledge them?" "No." His face twitched slightly, like he was listening to something else speaking over me. Then he smiled. Not like Lynn smiled. Too slow. The corners of his mouth moved at different speeds. "They say you looked longest." I backed away instinctively. The silver-haired woman stood up. "For God's sake, close the shades." Nobody moved, because everyone was staring downward, at the ocean. The lights below were arranging themselves now. Patterns. I thought symbols at first, but they weren't symbols. Coordinates. I realized that with a sudden horrible clarity that came from nowhere, the way you sometimes know the answer to a math problem without solving it. The shapes beneath the Pacific were positioning themselves exactly beneath our descent path, waiting, filing us into place. The aircraft banked slightly left, without pilot input. Harris shouted something from the cockpit. Lynn's head turned sharply toward the sound, then back toward the windows, and all the cabin lights shut off completely. Darkness swallowed everything except the blue glow from the ocean below. The passengers became silhouettes, breathing, whispering, crying. The man behind me was praying in what sounded like the same language as the older woman, even though they hadn't sat together and didn't seem to know each other. The floor vibrated softly under my feet, like distant machinery waking up beneath us. The intercom clicked one final time. Not my voice now, something deeper, wet somehow, older than wet. "Descend." The aircraft immediately lowered altitude, fast, too fast. Passengers screamed as the nose angled downward over the Pacific. Outside, the ocean surface became visible for the first time. Black water, and beneath it, eyes. Thousands of pale, circular lights staring upward in the kind of perfect grid you only get from something that was placed deliberately. The silver-haired woman grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Close your eyes." I did, immediately, because something in her voice bypassed thought completely. The plane kept descending, engines roaring now, warning alarms screaming faintly from the cockpit. People crying all around me, and beneath everything a sound from below the ocean. Not heard exactly, felt, like something enormous processing us. Then, suddenly, silence. Perfect silence. No engines, no alarms, no movement. I opened my eyes slowly. The cabin lights were normal again. Seatbelt sign on. Window shades closed. Passengers sitting quietly. As if nothing had happened. The aircraft was taxiing. I could hear wheels against pavement, rain hitting the fuselage softly. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it inside my own skull. I stood up shakily and looked outside through the porthole on the cabin door. Small runway lights, palm trees bending in ocean wind, a private island airstrip. The tech founder passed me while gathering his bag. "You did better than most first-timers," he said quietly. Then he left the aircraft. One by one, the passengers disembarked into the rain, calm again, normal. As they filed past me, the silver-haired woman paused. She did not look at me, but she said, very softly, almost to herself, "It used to be at 4, then 5, now 7. I don't know what she meant. I never saw her again to ask. Except for Lynn. He never exited the cockpit. Neither did Harris. Ground staff eventually boarded without speaking to me. 2 men in gray uniforms walked directly into the cockpit and shut the door behind them. I never saw either pilot again. Not that night, not afterward. By morning, Meridian informed me both had been reassigned indefinitely. No investigation, no report, no explanation, just reassigned. I tried quitting 2 weeks later, and my employee access was removed before I even reached the terminal parking lot, then restored again the next morning. No message attached, just active again, like the company had decided for me. For a long time after that flight, I didn't sleep near windows. I'd moved my bed to the interior wall of my apartment within 3 days of getting home. I told myself it was light pollution. Then I started taping the inside of the bathroom window with a layer of newspaper, then a layer of cardboard. I told myself that was condensation. I told myself a lot of things that month. The smell of seawater followed me. It would show up in my kitchen at random hours and disappear before I could find a source. My downstairs neighbor knocked once to ask if a pipe had burst. I said yes, even though it hadn't, because it was easier than explaining that I'd been waking up at 3:47 every morning to the sound of 3 soft knocks coming from somewhere inside my walls, and that I'd been counting the seconds between them, and that the count was always slightly different in a pattern I was starting to almost recognize. I covered the bathroom mirror with a towel, then the hallway mirror, then eventually the small reflective screen on my microwave, because at certain hours of the morning, it caught the kitchen window at exactly the angle that made the dark outside seem to be inside the appliance. I knew this was irrational. I covered them anyway. People do worse things to feel safe. I lost weight. I drank coffee until my hands shook and then drank more. I avoided airline content on social media because the sound of an engine in any video, even a TikTok someone filmed from a tarmac, made my chest tighten in a way that felt rehearsed by my body, not chosen. Once, in line at a grocery store, the woman in front of me coughed once, then twice, then a third time, evenly spaced, and I had to physically grip the handle of my cart to keep myself from running out of the building. She glanced back at me apologetically. I smiled in a way I hope did not look like a person about to vomit. I still went back. Of course I went back. Part of me needed to know if it had really happened. Part of me was already incapable of working any other job, because nothing else paid that well and nothing else gave you that quiet feeling of having seen the underside of a world most people don't even know exists. But I started flying again, only the Pacific routes, always westbound, always toward the island. And after enough time, you start realizing the worst part isn't what you see beneath the ocean. It's what starts noticing you afterward. The next flight happened 23 days later, or 25, depending on which screen you trusted. The dispatch text said the 23rd, My phone calendar said the 25th. My company-issued tablet said both, on different pages, depending on whether I tapped the schedule first or the inbox first. I didn't argue with any of them. I just showed up on the day I was told to. The terminal felt different this time. Quieter. The carpet still smelled like industrial cleaner and stale cigarettes, but now I noticed things I hadn't before. There were no clocks anywhere in the building, no televisions. Even the large decorative windows facing the runway had been heavily tinted black, all of them, since my last visit. The tint was perfect and uniform and recent. A receptionist I'd never seen before handed me my credentials without speaking. Then she paused, noticed something behind me, and immediately looked away. I turned around. There was nothing behind me. Just a long, empty hallway and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. That tiny reaction stayed with me longer than anything else. The staff at Meridian behaved like hospital staff around terminal patients. Polite, calm, quietly aware of things nobody discussed aloud. The aircraft waiting outside wasn't one of our standard Gulfstreams. This one was larger. A customized Boeing painted matte black with no registration markings visible under the rain. The windows looked darker than normal too, and when I got close, I realized why. They had a faint inner coating, like an extra layer of glass had been added between the original pane and the cabin. Harris was gone. New pilots. Neither of them introduced themselves, which terrified me immediately, because aviation crews always introduce themselves. Routine matters in aircraft environments. The older one looked exhausted. The younger one looked sedated. Both of them already knew my name. I could tell by how carefully they avoided saying it. In the galley, the descent packet was already open on the counter. Page 9 was visible. But the rules had changed. There were 6 now. During final descent, 1. Cabin lights must remain dimmed during descent. 2. All window shades must remain closed after announcement. 3. Do not acknowledge lights beneath the ocean. 4. Do not respond to voices using crew members' identities. 5. If knocking is heard inside the cabin floor, do not investigate source. 6. If the ocean appears closer than expected, do not inform passengers. I reread Rule 6 3 separate times, because aircraft don't accidentally descend unnoticed. Altitude awareness is constant during flight operations, but the wording implied something else entirely, as if perception itself became unreliable near approach. I flipped the packet shut and then opened it again. Page 9 had 7 rules now. There was a 7th line at the bottom I hadn't seen 10 seconds earlier. Acknowledgment is final. I closed it, opened it, 6 again. I told myself I had miscounted. I made myself count out loud the 3rd time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. I put the packet down and didn't touch it again until boarding. There were 9 passengers that night, all of them quiet, all of them experienced. You could tell immediately. Nobody asked destination questions. Nobody opened shades. Nobody removed their headphones. One man taped his own window shut, using black electrical tape from his bag, before the safety announcement was even finished. He did it casually, the way someone fastens their own seatbelt without thinking. That disturbed me more than the rules did. It meant passengers were carrying their own precautions now. A woman in first class kept rubbing moisturizer onto her hands, over and over in slow circles, while staring at nothing. The bottle was almost empty by the time we took off. An older man whispered numbers under his breath continuously, the same sequence repeating, though I couldn't catch what the numbers were. A man 2 rows behind him was chewing gum aggressively, jaw working like he was trying to grind something out of his teeth. A woman across from him had put on a satin sleep mask before the safety briefing even began, and lay very still with her hands folded on her stomach, mouth slightly open. She wasn't asleep. I could tell by the way her fingers occasionally twitched. Another passenger, an older woman near 6B, refused water 3 times during boarding. Not coffee, not juice, specifically water. The fourth time I offered, she finally turned to me, smiled in a way that did not involve her eyes, and said, "Not over the ocean, dear." Then she folded her hands the same way the woman in the sleep mask had folded hers. The man in 7A had taped over the small mirrored badge on his luggage tag, the front-facing camera on his phone, and the inside of his window, all with the same kind of tape, all before takeoff. He spent the rest of boarding rotating a small wooden bead between his fingers and staring at the seam where the carpet met the wall. And there was the young one, maybe 25, first-timer, you can always tell. He still looked around too much. Before departure, he stopped me near the galley. "Is it true," he whispered, "that you can hear them before descent?" I stared at him. What? He immediately regretted asking. People regret curiosity very quickly on those flights. "Nothing," he muttered, and returned to his seat. I asked the older woman in 2C if she'd been on the route before, just to confirm what I already suspected. She nodded once without looking at me. I asked her if she remembered how many rules were in the descent packet. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "There were 4 the first time. And now? Don't count them." She turned her face to the window, which was already closed. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And don't trust them if they're all the same on both sides." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to know yet. We departed around 1 a.m. into heavy cloud cover. The climb felt normal. The atmosphere inside the aircraft did not. Nobody slept. That was new. Passengers just sat silently under dim amber cabin lighting while the engines droned around us. No conversations, no laptops, no drinks requested. Just quiet waiting, like people anticipating surgery. At one point, I passed row 3 and realized the older man wasn't whispering random numbers. He was counting minutes, time until descent. About 40 minutes in, the seatbelt sign chimed once. Not the standard double chime. A single, slightly off-pitch tone, like the system was experimenting with the idea of a chime. Nobody reacted. The sign stayed lit afterward, even though we'd been a cruise for some time. An hour after that, the intercom clicked on for half a second. A woman's voice said, very politely, "And the temperature outside our aircraft is," and stopped. There was no in-flight announcement happening. The intercom did not click on again to finish the thought. The temperature outside our aircraft remained technically unannounced. I noticed something around then that I tried very hard not to notice. The cabin display screen at the front of first class, the one that shows flight time and altitude, had stopped updating altitude. It still showed our climb rate. It still showed our position. But the altitude number was frozen at 33,000 feet, while the climb rate said we were still ascending. The two numbers did not relate to each other. I looked at it for a long time. Eventually, I looked away. The screen behind me, the one mounted at the rear of the cabin, showed an altitude that was different again, but moving normally. The first overtly strange thing happened 3 hours into the flight. The younger pilot exited the cockpit and walked to the rear lavatory. As he passed me, I noticed seawater dripping from his sleeve cuff. Not coffee, not sink water, salt. I caught a hint of it in the air, that low mineral edge that no plain galley should ever produce. He locked himself inside the bathroom for almost 11 minutes. When he emerged, his face was pale gray under the cabin lights, and he asked me quietly, "Did anyone open a shade?" "No." He stared at the passengers for several seconds, then nodded once. He didn't look relieved. He looked confused, like he'd expected the answer to be yes. I made a small pot of coffee just to do something with my hands. The sound of the water boiling and the smell of grounds in the galley was so ordinary it almost made me cry. The man chewing gum asked for a cup. He thanked me politely and his voice sounded completely normal, and his eyes did not match his voice. I noticed something in the galley mirror then. I was reaching up for a fresh stack of cups, and I caught my own reflection, and behind me I could see the cabin. and one of the seats showed empty, even though I knew there was a passenger in it. The angle had to have been wrong. I turned around. The passenger was there, exactly where she should be. Eyes closed, sleep mask on, hands folded. I turned back to the mirror and the reflection was correct now. She was there too. I drank the coffee I'd made for myself in 3 swallows and got back to work. A little while later, the intercom played the first half of a routine announcement. Cabin crew, prepare for, and never finished the sentence. The older woman in 2C reached forward and patted the seat back in front of her once, gently, like reassuring an animal. Around 4:12 a.m., the aircraft entered descent. Something felt wrong immediately, not emotionally, physically. The floor vibration changed. Aircraft develop emotional textures after enough years working inside them. You subconsciously memorize engine frequencies, pressure shifts, structural vibrations. This felt lower, like the aircraft wasn't descending through air anymore. The lights dimmed automatically. Window shades remained closed. Passengers straightened in their seats almost simultaneously. And somewhere beneath the aircraft, 3 knocks echoed softly upward through the cabin floor. The young passenger froze. Nobody else reacted. They'd heard it before. Another 3 knocks, closer. Then silence. The intercom clicked, static crackled, and a woman's voice calmly said, "Please keep your eyes closed during approach." Not crew, not pre-recorded, and definitely not coming from the cockpit. The passengers obeyed immediately, every single one, eyes shut, heads lowered slightly, like church prayer. Then the same voice spoke again, the same exact sentence, with the exact same intonation. The voice was looping itself, very softly, on a 1-second delay, 2 seconds delay, 3. By the time I realized what was happening, the cabin had become a faint chorus of an instruction we'd already followed. I stood frozen in the aisle while cold pressure built in my chest. The older woman near first class whispered, just loud enough to carry, "It knows there's a new one." The young passenger heard her. Panic flooded across his face. What does that mean? Nobody answered. The aircraft descended lower, and suddenly the engines became silent. Not shut off, silent. The plane still moved, but the engine noise vanished completely. Absolute silence swallowed the cabin. No airflow, no vibration, nothing. Human beings are not supposed to experience total silence inside an aircraft, and your body notices instantly. Passengers started breathing harder. The woman with the moisturizer was clutching her own knee so hard her knuckles had gone white. The older man covered his ears. Someone behind me made a small, involuntary sound, something between a hum and a swallow. From somewhere far below the plane, something enormous moved through water. You could hear it distantly, not a splash, pressure, like an entire ocean shifting beneath us, the way water shifts in a bathtub when someone large gets in. Then the young passenger made the mistake. He opened his eyes. I saw it happen, just slightly, curiosity overpowering fear for half a second. Immediately, 3 violent knocks slammed beneath his seat. He screamed. The passengers recoiled. The cabin lights turned deep blue. The intercom clicked again, this time using his voice. "Can I look now?" Perfect imitation. He started crying immediately. "No, no, no, no." Then the intercom spoke again. Same voice, same pitch. "Can I look now?" A heartbeat later. "Can I look now?" The phrase was being saved, filed, replayed back to him from somewhere not quite his own mouth. Then his window shade slowly began rising by itself. He grabbed it desperately, fighting it with both hands. But something on the other side kept pulling upward. A thin line of blue light spilled into the cabin. Everyone else turned away instantly, not from fear, instinct. He looked directly at me. "Help me." I moved toward him automatically, then remembered Rule 4. Do not respond to voices using crew members' identities. I froze again because the voice begging now wasn't his anymore. It still sounded close to his, but the cadence was wrong. Slightly behind, like someone learning human panic through imitation, and not quite getting the timing of the breaths. The shade lifted another inch. Blue ocean light flooded across his face. His expression changed, not terror, recognition. Like he'd just seen someone he loved standing outside the aircraft. "Oh." That was all he said. Just, "Oh." Then he stopped resisting. Completely. His hands fell away from the shade. The window opened fully. Every passenger shut their eyes tighter, but I looked, just for 1 second, and I wish I hadn't. At first there was only the ocean, black water, and the same blue structures I had seen the first time, slowly rotating beneath the surface in their grid pattern of cities. The aircraft was lower this time, low enough that I could see how the structures interconnected. Lines of pale light running from one formation to the next in straight, efficient routes. None of it moved like life. All of it moved like infrastructure. The horizon was gone completely. I couldn't tell where the ocean ended, or where the aircraft even was anymore. We seemed to be suspended inside a single enormous body of water, with the sky reflecting the sea, and the sea reflecting the sky, and the aircraft hanging in between them like a fly in a glass. It took me another second to understand that there was movement closer to the window than the structures were, pale shapes rising, smoothly, in formation. The way airport ground crew moves into position before a gate opens. Then, finally, faces. Not all at once, one at a time, each one drifting up into the light from below, holding the position other shapes had vacated, taking its place at the window with something that looked, from a distance, almost like patience. There were 8 of them in clear view by the time I forced myself to recognize what I was seeing. There were more behind them. The water was full of more behind them. They were not human. They were approximations. Massive pale shapes just beneath the water with eyes too far apart and faces too wide, and mouths that weren't quite where mouths should be. One of them seemed to almost smile, in the way a person trying to learn a language smiles when they get a word almost right. The smile was practiced. It was a smile someone had taught it. The young passenger smiled back at the window, then quietly whispered, "I remember now." And the window exploded inward, not shattered, opened. Ocean water flooded into the cabin without pressure loss, impossible black seawater pouring across carpet while passengers screamed, but the water moved wrong, too slowly, like thick oil. The cabin should have decompressed instantly. We should all have been sucked outward into nothing. None of us were. The water just kept coming, slow and patient, the way an audit comes. Inside it, hands. Dozens of pale, human-like hands reaching through the flooding aisle toward passengers' legs. Fingers too long by one knuckle. Skin the texture of something boiled and then left in a freezer. The aircraft alarms finally activated. Red emergency lighting flashed across the cabin. The pilots shouted from the cockpit, both of them at once, overlapping, neither of them finishing a sentence. Passengers climbed onto seats trying to avoid the water. The woman in the sleep mask had her hands clenched into fists in her lap and was not moving at all. The gum-chewing man was trying to crawl over his armrest into the aisle and slipped, his shoes squeaking on wet carpet that should not have been wet. Someone behind me was howling, actually howling, the sound a dog makes, and I could not tell who. A hand brushed against my ankle. It was cold in a way that wasn't temperature. It felt cold the way a memory of being cold feels cold. I jerked my leg back and hit my hip on the galley counter, and the pain was sharp and ordinary and almost grounding. The young passenger remained perfectly calm while seawater surrounded him. Something beneath the water touched his face gently, with the indifferent care of an attendant checking a temperature reading. He started laughing. That laugh still follows me sometimes, because it sounded relieved, not afraid, relieved. Like someone who'd been holding their breath for years, finally remembering they didn't have to. The cabin lights strobed, the oxygen masks dropped halfway, retracted, dropped again. Warning alarms layered on top of each other in a way that made the air itself feel solid. A second hand grabbed at someone's ankle 2 rows up, and the person, I never figured out who. Screamed in a register I didn't think a human voice could make. The intercom clicked very calmly and said, "Thank you for confirming." Then the entire aircraft lurched violently downward. Passengers screamed. The water vanished instantly, completely gone. Dry carpet, normal pressure, normal cabin lighting, as if nothing had happened. Except the young passenger's seat was empty, just empty. Seatbelt still fastened, window closed again. No broken glass, no water, nothing. A faint, wet, salty smell. One woman started sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Another passenger quietly began praying. The man chewing gum had stopped chewing and was holding the gum in his fingers, looking at it like he didn't recognize what it was. The woman in the sleep mask had not moved at all during any of it. She still hadn't. The intercom softly whispered, "Window acknowledgment accepted." The aircraft landed 12 minutes later. Nobody spoke during taxi. Nobody asked questions. Ground crew boarded silently after arrival. For the first time, I saw what waited outside the runway. Not buildings, not terminals, shapes. Enormous dark shapes standing motionless beyond the rain near the edge of the airstrip. Far too tall to be vehicles. Watching the aircraft, watching us unload. One of the ground crew noticed me staring. He immediately pulled the cabin door shut harder, blocking the view, and quietly told me, "Don't watch them watching you." As the passengers disembarked, the older woman from 2C paused beside me at the door. She studied my face for a moment, the way someone studies an old photo trying to remember when it was taken. "You weren't on the flight last month," she said. "I haven't flown this route since the first one." She nodded slowly as if confirming something she had already decided. "Strange. I remember you being there. You were sitting in 4D. You handed me a glass of water." She left before I could answer. I went and checked the manifest on my tablet for the previous month. There was a flight I had no memory of taking. My name was on it. My signature was on the cabin operations log. The route number in the entry was 7A. The handwriting was mine. I left Meridian 2 days later. Actually left. New city, new apartment, new phone number. For a while it worked. The dreams stopped. The knocking stopped. The smell of seawater disappeared. I almost convinced myself I'd escaped. Until 3 nights ago, I was on a normal commercial flight descending over the Atlantic. Completely unrelated airline. Completely different route. I'd taken the red-eye home from a city I'd never been to. For a job interview I almost didn't make myself attend. For an industry that wasn't aviation. The man in the seat next to me had been doing a crossword for 2 hours. The flight attendants spoke loudly and laughed at each other's jokes. Everything was the kind of normal that should have felt good and didn't. Halfway through descent, the cabin lights dimmed automatically. A child across the aisle looked out his window, then quietly asked his mother, "Why are there lights under the water?" Nobody else reacted. That's not the part that broke me. That part I expected in some way. I had spent 2 years expecting it. The part that broke me was the row behind me. A woman closed her shade before the announcement. A man across the aisle from her did the same. Then a businessman in 14C. Then an older couple toward the back, in perfect unison, the way the silver-haired woman had done it the first night. None of them looked at each other. None of them looked at me. They had all worked the route, or flown it, or known someone who had. Or maybe, and this is what I keep coming back to, this is the thought that won't let me sleep anymore. Maybe none of those things, and they just know. The way the silver-haired woman knew, the way my body knows, the way the kid in the window seat already half knew and didn't have the vocabulary for yet. It was never the route. It was never Meridian. The route was just where we noticed it first. At that exact moment, 3 soft knocks sounded beneath my seat. And I closed my eyes, because at some point in the last 2 years, I had stopped being the kind of person who responds to things like that. I just sat very still in coach class, on a commercial flight, in the dark, somewhere over the Atlantic, and waited to land. 3 more knocks answered from somewhere further back in the cabin, then a 4th set, closer. The reading light above my road dimmed by a notch, the way a light bulb dims when a larger appliance somewhere else in the building draws power. And across the aisle, the child stopped asking his mother questions. He didn't fall asleep. He just stopped. His small hand was resting on the closed shade, and he was sitting very still, the way I had taught myself to sit. The way the silver-haired woman had been sitting the first time I ever saw her. The way everyone learns to sit eventually. The intercom clicked on once, very softly, and said, "Thank you for confirming." Then it clicked off. And somewhere far below us, deep beneath the Atlantic, something began to rise.